Hi, my name is Bo Wilmer, and I work for Critigen. We are a GIS integrator, and we work across a lot of different domains. But the area that I focus on for Critigen is natural resources, and presently I oversee our delivery of comprehensive GIS services for the Forest Service. And so in that capacity, I work on a whole range of projects from enterprise data management to publication of web services to web application development to native mobile development, all geospatial applications. So thanks for having me. Thanks for being here. And I'm eager to share with you our project. I wanted to share with you a project that we've been working on for the Forest Service called PIMS. This is the Planning, Implementation, and Monitoring System. And so what this is really an effort that was intended to inform how project planning, especially for NEPA, which is the the National Environmental Policy Act, whenever there's a project that's proposed on Forest Service lands, there really is lacking a systematic approach to equip forests with a standard set of tools and steps to follow to leverage GIS data to inform decisions. And so that's what this proof of concept project was that we're calling PIMS here. So we'd like to share that with you. As I mentioned, typically right now, a lot of projects are proposed and executed and implemented on forests in fairly piecemeal ways. They're often done independently, they access different data sets inconsistently, and they use them in different ways. And so really what this project is intended to do is to understand how we might better leverage some standard data, some authoritative published data that are available as web services through ArcGIS Online, and to be able to use those data to inform decisions through every step of the planning process, from planning a project to the actual implementation of the project itself, to then monitoring whether or not that project has been effective at accomplishing its management goals. So what we're looking at here is a story map, and I'm going to walk you through it. I'll share the link with you in the chat after this is over, but I'm not going to read it through for you so you can review it on your own. But the summary here, at least at the beginning, is to introduce this challenge that most forests face, is that whenever there's a project proposed, there isn't really a systematic, authoritative set of data that we can repeatedly return to inform decisions or develop some best practices or maybe some analyses that would help inform a project. It's really done kind of ad hoc on a forest by forest basis. And so part of what I want to share with you today is really just a view of what would PIMS do. This is a demonstration of some of the functions that we think would be helpful as forests embark on any forest planning project, on any project planning. So I'm going to show you a few things, and I'll roll through them in order here. First, I'm going to show you that what would really be helpful for PIMS is to equip forest planners with authoritative data that are published by the agency and available as web services already in ArcGIS Online through the Enterprise Data Warehouse. This is a vast effort across the Forest Service to authorize and standardize some core data that, that the Forest Service publishes nationwide. So we'll demonstrate how those data can be made available through this interface directly to inform decisions. But we're also going to peel back the onion a little bit in terms of some more obscure data sets that the Forest Service depends on in order to execute its forest planning and its project planning. So the first of those is we're going to demonstrate what it might look like to render some project planning data from PALs. This is usually representing the project boundary itself. If we were to draw a boundary around a project, what would that polygon look like and how would we describe it through this database called PALs? So we'll see what that looks like. We're also going to dive into what the actual treatments themselves are that are being proposed for any project, and to demonstrate what those data look like to represent the actual treatments that are being proposed. Right now, we would need to dive into several different isolated databases that the Forest Service maintains independently. So if we're looking at forest activities, we would go to FACTS database. If we're looking for timber projects, we would look in the TIMS database. If there's a roads project, we would look under infra. And currently, these are all independent databases right now. So we'll demonstrate a little bit of what this would look like if they were all made available through a more intuitive interface. We're going to also compare planned projects with projects that are already under some phase of implementation. So some of these projects can last several years, and we'd like to be able to compare where we are in the lifespan of any project. We're also going to demonstrate how we can access and integrate monitoring data, which is a crucial component of understanding and informing the NEPA process. So we develop best practices, and so we learn adaptation, and we learn and we adapt as we learn new information from monitoring. And then finally, the ultimate point here is that we want to render this all through a common platform. In this case, we're using ArcGIS Online because it represents the best platform for us to be able to collaborate across, to be able to share maps, and collaborate on making decisions using landscape data. So let me start by just explaining that this is a mock-up. This is just a view of what the PIMS interface could look like. And you'll see that it takes advantage of industry best practices. We've got your standard tools, some widgets. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can toggle a legend on. And so for those of you who are familiar with ArcGIS Online or web applications, spatial web applications, this should be pretty intuitive. And I'll explain a little bit more about what these toggles are up top. You'll see at the right here, in the upper right, there's this planning, implementation, monitoring system. These each represent a tab. And so if we were to click on the planning tab, that would open up for you a number of tools and data that can help inform the planning workflow, the steps that you have to take to deliver and publish a plan for any a NEPA document for any project that's proposed. Similarly, if we're implementing a project that's already been approved and authorized, we're going to have a different set of data and a different set of tools made available to us. Same thing for monitoring. And you'll see at the end, system represents a little bit more of a human network to understand how we collaborate on projects. So again, just a first toe in the water to see what this view might look like. And now let's zoom in and take a look at an actual project. Let's say that we're collaborating here with in a partnership with the community of Challis. This is in Idaho. And we're looking at the Salmon Challis National Forest here. And let's just suppose that we were working in a collaborative group with the community of Challis, and we're curious about whether or not this landscape up the Mill Creek drainage would represent a good opportunity for us to do some fuel reduction work, maybe for community protection, or maybe there's some bug kill infestation that we could work to restore. We just like to understand if it's appropriate for us to do some project here to accomplish some goals outlined in the forest plan. And the first step that you take when you draw a boundary, we would use this tool right up here, and you draw a polygon around any landscape. And the first thing that pops up here, for example, would be a data extract tool. We want to understand all the authoritative data that are published by the Forest Service through the Enterprise Data Warehouse. And so you can see we could access watershed condition classification, western bark beetle strategy, wild and scenic rivers. And there's a long list of authoritative data that are made available through this interface from the Enterprise Data Warehouse. So now I explained a little bit how you got this planning tab. So if we step into the planning tab and we'd like to understand what types of data and what types of tools are available to us, we've still got this polygon that we drew around this landscape. And we'd like to understand beyond just what available landscape data there are from the Enterprise Data Warehouse, we'd also like to understand if there's ever been any work that's been done here before. So we want to know, for example, has there been ever a project that's occurred in this landscape? And in this instance, by drawing this polygon, we've identified two. You can see this kind of turkey-looking one over here, and then you can see a round circle. Those are two different project boundaries that have occurred historically. And what's neat about this interface is you would be able to sort these project boundaries based on what type of resource area you're working on. So if we were only curious about where the fire and fuels project have occurred, we could select that resource area, and what would display is only the fire and fuels relevant projects. Similarly, if there's a lands or hydrology project, we could click on these resource areas and only view the projects that have occurred to address that resource area. Similarly, we could turn them all on and we would see all the cumulative representation of all the projects that have occurred historically across the landscape. That's a really important data set to be an important understanding to achieve before we propose any new projects. We'd like to understand if work has been done there before. So the next step here, I'm going to scroll down a little farther, is we're still in planning here. Now we'd like to understand, apart from the fact that there's been a project proposed in this area, we'd like to also understand what are the actual treatments that are going to be implemented within that project polygon boundary. So in this case, and I'll scroll down so you can see the legend a little bit, you can see that there are a number of treatments called for within this project. A lot of broadcast burning. You can see there's some thinning for hazardous fuels reduction. There's some piling of fuels that's called for. And so this gives us a more granular view of the actual treatments that are proposed within this project. And again, we can sort those treatments by resource area, or we could view them all at once. In this case, because this is a fire-relevant resource area and a project, that's why we've got the fire toggle turned on here. So as we scroll down, just to pause a little bit to mention that the data we're rendering here are currently harvested from, we harvested them from a number of independent databases right now. And there remains beneath this interface and beneath this proof of concept, there remains a lot of work to do to integrate and standardize some of these data sets that represent where work has been accomplished on the forests historically. So there remains an integration effort and an effort to render these data that are currently stored in corporate databases, but they're stored independently and they are somewhat a legacy of previous way of doing business, which stored all these different data results and accomplishments within independent resource-specific databases. So we'd like to recognize that there still is an effort in data stewardship to render these data as easily as they would appear through this proof of concept. So let me scroll down a little more and I'll demonstrate what we might look at to consider now the implementation phase of work. Keep in mind that throughout these phases of work, we're going to work with individual forests to design and equip these interfaces with a number of tools that the forests themselves identify as necessary and important to make their decisions, whether it's in planning or implementation. So what you see here is right now just kind of a sampling of some token widgets, but we're engaged in an effort with the forests to design these types of tools that are going to be most helpful for forest planners or project implementers actually doing the work. Right now, though, you can see that we've got data that are available to us that are specific to the implementation phase of work, and we can see the treatments themselves. A next step when we consider monitoring here, and also this could equally be a tool made available through any of these phases of work. But right here, we're comparing through a slider bar, just for example, those projects and treatments that have been planned for on the left of the slider, but then you can see to the right of the slider those treatments that have actually been accomplished already. So as we were explaining, some of these projects can last several years, and it's important to understand where we are in the course of a project through various field seasons to understand what treatments have actually been accomplished already and what remain to be executed. So this slider bar is just an example of how we could compare during the lifespan of a project where we are and how we are on track to deliver what we proposed through this project. So I mentioned monitoring, and it's important to recognize that there are a lot of different sources of monitoring data here. So for example, we could be pulling and accessing individual field monitoring data, field sheets from field monitoring of these stands. For example, we could also make available just the Fish and Wildlife Service portal for ecosystem monitoring. So there are a number of avenues here for us to render the monitoring data through this interface that would inform the efficacy and the effectiveness of these projects that have been proposed and implemented. Finally, there's this system tab, and this is important to represent that there is a human ecosystem behind every project here. And so let's say, for example, that I've been able to use PIMS to identify where we are in the course of a project and how much of it has been accomplished and what remains to be done. But I've got a question, and I'm sitting perhaps in an adjacent district, or I'm interested in understanding some of the cumulative effects for hydrology or fire and fuels. And I've got a question that I want to ask the ID team who developed this project. So the System tab here would allow a user to understand who worked on a project, who designed that treatment, and what's their phone number? How do I get in touch with that person to be able to ask a question? This would be made available to staff within the Forest Service, but it could equally well represent the points of contact for the public to ask information. So again, the System tab represents a human network that would allow and facilitate collaboration within the agency on any project. So as I share with you this story map in the link, you can explore, so everything we've seen has been a proof of concept. What you can see a little bit further in each of these links below is a demonstration of some of those specific projects, some of those specific functions. So for example, if we wanted to understand what that slider bar would look like, we can open up this web application and it would show us, for example, how we might use this tool. And so in this case, it's just a web application. There's a couple of services that still need to be improved. But right now you can see, for example, if we wanted to zoom in on this project and we wanted to toggle base maps, for example, so we wanted to understand what the actual landscape looks like there, this would be the functions that PIMS could, these are the functions that could be made available to forest users of PIMS. So for example, if we wanted to use this slider bar, we wanted to understand, hey, there's a project that's been planned here, and we'd like to understand if it's been executed. Well, sure enough, we can see that there's a project polygon here that's been planned for, but we can see both from the imagery and from the slider bar that it has not yet been accomplished. And so this is important to recognize, and that's a type of function that would equip planners with the ability to see presently where are we in the course of a project, but also if I'm still designing a project and just planning one from scratch, I need to know what that cumulative history of forest management looks like. So there's a big effort underway with the Forest Service to improve data stewardship for historical data and treatments and what projects we've already accomplished. And there's also a major effort to try to integrate and make more intuitive some of the corporate databases that the Forest Service maintains. Not only so that forest managers can do their business with better evidence, but also so that we can convey that effort to the public transparently. So this is, again, been a proof of concept, and this is largely intended to inform forest planners about how they might be able to better leverage ArcGIS Online as a standard platform for decision making. You'll see that there's a summary report at the bottom of the story map, but at the end of the day, we wanted to demonstrate that this is work that we think could be, that this is a feasible approach and would represent a much more systematic, consistent, and transparent best practice for project planning, implementation, and monitoring. Thanks so much for your time today. I welcome any questions in the chat, and I'm eager to follow up with any questions or any interest. So thank you so much for attending this talk. I am really eager to connect with any of you, even though we are in a remote environment through the Esri user conference here. I remain really committed to this work, and I'm really eager to collaborate with any of you who are interested. So thanks so much, and please reach out. Thank you.